So before we start, let's just turn to the person next to you and tell them the statement of faith. There's still so much more to come. Tell them. Do you believe that? I do. I do. I want to tell you a story this morning. It's a story that many of you might know. It's a story that some of you might have even read, and some of you might have forgotten. But it's a story that some of you may have never heard, and I'm going to experience it for the very first time this morning. And it's a story about the secret garden. Have you guys heard about that story before? Raise your hand if you know about the secret garden. There's not too many of you, which means you're going to experience it for the first time this morning, which is great. It's exciting. It's a story that starts with a little girl. She's 10 years old, and her name is Mary. Now, Mary was born in India to parents who wanted nothing to do with her. She had parents that didn't love her. She had parents that didn't care for her. They ignored her constantly, and as I'm sure you can imagine, because of such actions towards her, she became quite a hard little girl. She became quite bitter. She didn't know what it meant to experience love, and in return, she didn't know how to show love. But at the age of 10, an epidemic of cholera breaks out in India, to which her parents are affected, and they die. To which Mary is left in a house all alone, staying with an English clergyman. But this only lasts for a short while until she is sent over to England, Yorkshire, to her uncle, Mr. Craven, who just happens to own this huge estate, this huge manor. But as you know, Mary takes the bitterness, she takes the anger, and all the irritation with her, which is why she spends a lot of her first few days in her bedroom, not wanting to see anyone, not wanting to talk to anyone, and those who did try and talk to her, she just ignored and didn't want anything to do with them. But there was someone special at the manor, at the estate. There was a maidservant. And this maidservant's name was Martha. You might start to pick up some similarities as we go along. Her name was Martha. And Martha comes to hear about Mary, this girl from India. And every day Martha tries to interact, tries to talk to Mary. But as you can imagine, Mary just gives her the bat. At first, Mary doesn't want anything to do with Martha. She just ignores her. And Martha persists. Martha keeps pushing on. She's going to try until she gets a breakthrough. And day after day, she keeps talking to Mary until Mary eventually opens up. Until Mary starts to understand what it means to be loved and that she can love in return. Because how many of you believe that love can change a hard heart? Love can restore something that was lost. Love can mend a brokenness to people. And Martha's love eventually starts to break through the hardness and the brokenness within Mary and starts to restore something that was lost to the point where they become great friends. And as time goes on, Mary even makes friends with a gardener named Ben. And she even makes very good friends with a red-breasted robin bird which would fly around with her as she would explore the estate, the gardens on the manor. But there was one night, just before Mary was going to bed, where she hears a voice echoing through the corridors. Hello? Hello? Quite creepy. I couldn't make it creepier than that. And, but Mary, being a 10-year-old girl, tries to ignore the noise because it's only in the movies do people are crazy enough to go try and find the creepy noise in the dark. I've never understood that. I don't think I ever will. So Mary, eventually the noise stops and Mary eventually goes to sleep. And a few days later, Martha and Mary end up having a chat. And Martha tells Mary about Mrs. Craven, Mr. Craven's wife, who used to have a garden. It's a garden that would become known as the secret garden. And Martha ends up telling Mary about this garden and how it was a garden unlike you'd ever seen before. Carrying flowers, plants, trees. From the moment you would enter in, it would leave you in complete awe. And as you can imagine, Mary's face is starting to glow. She's like, well, where's the garden? And Martha says to Mary, well, a few years ago, just after you were born, you would have been around the age of 1 or 2, there was an accident in the garden to which Mrs. Craven ends up dying. And this took everyone by a bit of a shock, especially Mr. Craven, to the point where Mr. Craven locked the door to which no one would ever be able to enter again, and no one has ever seen it since and knows where it is. But as you can imagine, this wasn't going to stop Mary. If anything, this just pumped her up. She thought this was her Dora Explorer moment. She was about to get her boots on and get out there and find this garden. And she does. She starts exploring the manor, the estate, but at first she finds nothing until a few days later she comes across this huge hedge. Huge. Too tall for her to see over. There were no windows, and at first it looked like there were no entrances, but she starts to scratch through. She even gets a few scratches herself, and she finds out that the hedge is blocking a huge stone wall. But she doesn't stop her. So she starts to make her way around. She keeps scratching, but it seems like she's walking in a bit of a square circle, constantly a loop, finding nothing, but she persists, and as she's scratching along the wall, she knocks and comes across and she finds a door. Could this be? Could this be the entrance she's been searching for, that to enter the secret garden? But it's locked. Now what? So after a long day of work, after a long day of searching, she calls it quits for night, but then she hears that voice again. You guys want to try that creepy voice? Hello? But she hears it, and this time she's a bit braver. This time she does what they do in the movie. She starts to explore, but she follows the sound until she finds herself facing a bedroom door, and she listens, and then goes, hello? And she opens the door ever so slightly, just to peep in. And then she sees a little boy. And she says, hello? And the little boy responds, hello back. And she says, who are you? And he says, my name is Colin. I'm Mr. Craven's son. So in other words, they were cousins. And Mary takes a few steps closer to Colin, and they end up chatting, and she says, but how come I haven't seen you around? Only people I've seen is Martha, Ben, and my Red Robin friend, and Mr. Craven. He's out on so many business trips, I never get to see him either, so where have you been? And Colin starts to tell Mary that he's had a problem with his spine his entire life. His whole life he's been told he's a cripple, and he'll never be able to walk, so he's been bedbound, and his only way of movement is in a wheelchair, which he shows her in the corner of the room. But they become really close friends, Mary and Colin, to the point where Mary ends up telling Colin all about this garden that she's trying to find, but she hasn't found it yet. And he says, wow, I really hope you find it, Mary. And she says, I hope so too. And they eventually go to bed, and the next day Mary's out exploring once again. And her red friend Robin draws her attention to like a bit of a dirt patch in the ground and starts tweet, 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 until she eventually makes her way and she starts digging to find the key. Could this be the key? She's a bit nervous at first. She makes her way towards the door, which is so secretly hidden, and she puts it in the keyhole, and she turns and click. The door unlocks, and she opens the doorknob, starts to turn it. But now she doesn't know what to expect. She's got this picture of beauty in her mind, and she opens the door, only to find that everything looked dead. Everything looked dead. The trees had died, the plants had withered, leaves of greys and browns all placed on the floor. But did that stop Mary from going in? No. Mary enters in through the store, and if you go and read the story for yourself, you'll see she is determined to get it restored to what it once was. She was determined to restore this garden to what Mrs. Craven had once made it. And she does. She gets the tools together, she starts to plow, she starts to plant, she starts to water, and eventually this garden starts to take bloom, green starts to appear, flowers start to take shape, and slowly but surely it starts to form a garden. Something that it used to be. And in this excitement, she goes to Colin, her friend, her cousin, and she says, Colin, we've got to get you to the garden. So they make a plan, a bit of a sneaky plan. The next day, they're going to put him in his wheelchair, and they're going to sneak him down to the garden. And they do. And from the moment Colin enters in, because you need to understand, he's pretty much never been outside. He's been cabin bound to his bed into a wheelchair in a lonely house. And he makes his way into this garden, which has just taken bloom. And he can't believe his eyes. He cannot believe the beauty. He's like, I've only ever heard the stories of my mom making this garden as beautiful as this. And as they continue to have fun in the garden, Mary turns to Colin. She says, Colin, have you ever tried to walk? And Colin says no. And they haven't tried. So Mary takes Colin's hands and he begins to take a few steps. to the point where Mary lets go and Colin is walking on his own. A boy who had been told he's crippled his whole life begins to walk on his own. Can you just imagine the joy on his face? Eh? Not being able to walk his whole life, reaches the age of 10, and now he's walking in a beautiful garden. Word gets to Martha, who sends word to Mr. Craven, who's out on a business trip. You need to get home quick. You need to get home ASAP. And he does. He drops what he's doing. He's far away, and he gets home. And on arrival, he runs to Martha, and he says, Martha, what's the emergency? Why did you call me to come home? And she says, you need to get to the garden. And he's like, what garden? The garden, your wife's garden. The one you locked up. You need to get there quick. And he starts running towards the garden. And as he approaches the wall along the side, he hears the children laughing. And he makes his way to the entrance to see what? He not only sees a garden that he hasn't seen as beautiful since when his wife was alive, but then he sees his son walking. And Mr. Craven drops to his knees in tears, and he cannot believe his eyes. To the point where he runs to his son and he grabs him and he hugs him. And he says, I can't believe this, my boy. And it's like everything about him changes. It's like the life that was stolen from him when his wife died is restored in this moment. And he takes his son's hand and they start to walk back home to what has now become a very warm house of love and color once again. And that's it. Beautiful story, isn't it? If you want to go read the fine details, you're more than welcome to, but it's a story of great adventure and great discovery. It's a story of great sorrow, but also great joy. It is a story of being lost, forgotten, to being found and renewed. As friends are made, as the flowers bloom, and the father takes his son's hand and walks him home. I'm pretty sure many of us would be able to relate to the story in at least one aspect. Each and every single one of us would be able to see something highlighted within the colors of life. Because there's so much in it. There's sorrow, there's joy, there's being lost, there's being found. There's a father taking his son's hand and taking him home. Taking him home. Did you guys know that this place is your home? This church is a place you are able to call home. You guys believe that? That's great. I want to talk about two gardens this morning. Two gardens that took root to form foundations of two very significant moments in our history as believers. But before we look at these two different gardens, and as you can see, I brought a bit of a garden myself. Do you guys like them? Some of you want them, don't you? Raise your hand now. Yes, I know. But before we talk about the two gardens, it's important for us to define what a garden is. Because many of you might have your own meanings, many of you might have your own translations related to moments, events, memories, things you have experienced. But the literal meaning out the dictionary puts it like this. It says, a garden is a piece of ground adjoining a house in which grass, flowers, and shrubs may be grown. Simple, right? But I think the key word in that definition is that joined. In other words, joined with. Another great way to see it is to be together. For the ground, the garden, and the house to be together, joined with one another. And it's with a meaning and a definition like that that I'm not surprised that we see God placing Adam and Eve in a garden. He places them in a garden. In other words, he's painting this very special picture that he wanted to be with them. That he wanted to live together with them in a home. Not alone, not lost, together. Not abandoned, not forgotten, together. And he says to Adam and Eve, he says, Adam and Eve, as I have made this garden one in perfect design, as the roots intertwine, as the trees give breath to your lungs, and the fruit nourishes your body, as everything is in perfect symphony, I want you two to be one, joined together, fruitful in this world. But that's not it. I don't just want you two to be one. I want you to walk side by side, joined together with me. God says, I want you to be joined together, one with me. And you know what? They were. They did walk side by side with God in the garden. Because we're not entirely too sure how long the world stayed sin-free before the fall. It could have been many years. But what we do know is that sin did enter in. And where does it begin? It began in the garden. It began in the garden. You might say, but Keegan, isn't that the garden God created? Yes, it is. Keegan, isn't that the garden where Adam and Eve would wake up to birds singing lullabies and rivers flowing? Yes, it is. Isn't that the place where God made to be their home, where they could walk side by side? Yes, it is. And with that, you might say, well, what went wrong? Well, what happened? I want to ask you a question this morning. When you picture sin coming into the world for the very first time, what do you see? How do you picture it taking place? What do you imagine? Do you see a bitten apple? I don't know if that's our Snow White heritage coming into play, Disney making its mark, I'm not too sure. Do you see the snake? What kind of snake do you see? Do you see a python? Do you see a mamba? Is it green? Is it a black one? Do you see two naked people running for cover? Does the picture instantly become overcast in your mind? How do you see it when sin came to the world? Because my question is, do you see this? Do you see the garden? When you picture sin coming into the world, do you see flowers? Do you see trees? Beautiful colors? Because the garden's still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. God hasn't kicked them out yet. It still surrounds them. So why don't we see it? Why don't we see the garden? And the reason why we don't see the garden and why we don't even see it in our present lives today is because sin is a lot like dirt. And you know the devil? Well, he likes to play dirty, doesn't he? Because he knows if I can just get it on their eyes, they won't be able to see. If I can just get it in their mouths, they won't be able to taste that God is good. If I can just rub it on their hearts, they'll feel like they are surrounded and buried in darkness. But I want to tell you something this morning, friends. The seeds of faith break through the dirt. Can I tell you again? The seeds of faith break through the dirt. Some of you are seeking breakthrough. You've been seeking breakthrough maybe this whole year. You might even be seeking breakthrough still this very morning. And I want to tell you something. God's pouring. God's pouring. His presence is flowing like in the rivers of the Garden of Eden. And He wants to pour it into you. Do you believe that? If you'll just have the heart to believe that He can help you grow in dirty places. He can help you grow in dirty places because He has the power to turn dirt into rich soil. He does. He has the power to turn dirt into rich soil. What I'm telling you is rich, friends. And I don't want you to miss this, what I'm about to tell you, because the enemy, he's got a shovel and he's trying to cover you up. He's trying to bury you. But friends, listen to this. The enemy cannot bury what God has planted. Did you hear what I said? If there's something you need to write down and carry with you for the rest of your life, as I'm going to, it is that the enemy cannot bury what God has planted. And He will bring it to completion. Because it's like T.D. Jakes writes, we all need to come to grips with growing in dirty places because the breakthrough is coming. The breakthrough is coming. There's coming a time where each and every single one of us will see the sun, we'll feel its light, and then we'll walk in it. We'll walk in it. Sin comes into the world. The devil thinks this is his moment. His bulldozer moment. He thinks he's got it in the bag, didn't he? But he forgot. He forgot who created it all. He forgot who made the garden and breathed life into dust. he forgot. But God knew that good things take time. God knew that good things take time, friends. He knew what was to come. Ultimately, he knew exactly who he was going to send. And who was it? Jesus. I see them both standing up in heaven, the Father and the Son, and I see the Father turning to his boy. He says, Jesus, you're going to save them all. From the throne in heaven, he looks down at all creation and what's to come, and he says, you're going to save them all. The devil didn't even know what was coming. Jesus was going to save us. And we fast forward a few years later, where we are going to be reading our first scripture this morning. If you want to open your Bibles in John chapter 19, verse 41 to 42. Jesus had just been crucified, to which one of his followers, disciples named Joseph, goes to Pilate and asks him for Jesus' body, to which Pilate agrees. And this is where we're going to continue to read in verse 41 to 42. It will come up on the screen. It says, at the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb, in which no one had ever been laid, because it was the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. I want to ask you another very similar question, which will hopefully challenge you. When you picture the moments of Jesus being crucified, what do you see? What have you always seen? Do you see the cross? Do you see the blood dripping? Do you see the thorns? Do you see the Roman soldiers laughing, mocking? Do you see the criminals on either side of Jesus? Do you see his mother Mary on her knees crying? What do you see? Do you see this? Do you see the garden? Because it's there. The garden's there. So why don't we see it? Friends, I find too many of us are focusing on way too much death, way too much stress, way too much worry, depression, anxiety, temptations. We are focusing on so much stuff. But I believe God is changing our perspective this morning because he wants us to see something else. He wants us to see the garden. He wants us to see the life in it all. He wants you to see it, but he doesn't just want you to see it. He wants you to feel it. Right now, this morning, he wants you to experience it. It's a kind of life. He even shows a criminal hanging on a cross next to him, because even in a moment of being hung on a cross, Jesus shows this man that he too can grow in a dirty place. Because hanging on a cross, I'm pretty sure we can agree, that was pretty dirty. It was pretty messy. But Jesus shows him that he can still grow. Because he had the power to take a man whose life was pretty filthy, and he could make him as white as snow and send him to paradise. If you don't believe me, go and read it for yourself. Jesus sends him to paradise and makes him as white as snow. I like to call Jesus' crucifixion Jesus' secret garden. Because we don't always see it. We don't always feel it. We don't always experience it. But can I tell you something? Jesus has been preparing us for it ever since. He has been preparing you. It says it was the day of preparation. Do you believe that God has been preparing you for something far greater than yourself? Because there is a huge difference between being buried and being planted. In other words, God has planted you, which means he is preparing you. He is preparing you for something so great. Are you excited about that? And you might say, what makes him so good at preparing you? It's like it says in John chapter 14. We all know this scripture. Verse 6. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He is your way. He is your truth in your life. That's what makes him so good at preparing you. Did you guys know that there is a right way of doing things? Did you guys know that? There's a right way of doing things. In other words, there is a process in preparation. As God prepares you, He takes you through a process which eventually gets you ready for what He has in store for you. There isn't instantaneous microwave effects at play here. Oak trees don't just touch the tips of clouds in a day. There's a preparation and a process. And there's even one when planting something. And even when God is planting you. So I thought we could illustrate that this morning. You guys keen? So I'm going to call my trusty assistant, Slade. Come on up, Slade. Let's give Slade a round of applause for doing such a great job in this church. Do you believe he is worthy of honor? Give him some more. You can give him some more. So hold this for me while I get ready. I told Slade he's not allowed to pull faces because he does that. His gloves are toit. Always makes me think of Dexter's mom. I don't know if you guys know that show, maybe that's a millennial thing. Are you guys impressed yet? It's an exciting experience even for me. But I thought to think of it literally like when planting something, there's a right way to do it. And there's a few steps. I might not follow all the steps, so if you're one of those green finger gardeners, don't attack me. You can come have a nice word with me afterwards and we can talk about it. But I'm going to do my best. Okay. But first of all, we need our pot plant, and what needs to be in the pot plant? Soil. The word I want to use is dirt. Okay. Just trying to use some dirt. And then, if you fancy, what do you put with the dirt? Compost. What's the stuff that stinks? Fertilizer. How many guys like the smell of fertilizer, eh? Does that just wake you up like you're on the farm in the morning? So you can add, this is like a lot of fertilizer, because we need some intense growth here this morning. And so you can mix that up a bit, get the dirt. I'm not going to do a very thorough job this morning. Then once we've done that, we need to make a hole, so that we can place if you want to just place the seeds there. Just chuck it all in there. That's fine, don't worry. Okay, once the seeds are in, then we need to cover the seeds. Yes, we need to cover the seeds. A little bit of a press, and then it's ready to be watered. And once we've watered it, then we just watch it grow. And you might say, yeah, long service. And the right way to do it. Some of you might disagree, but the simple right way. But the truth is, we need the dirt, don't we? We need the soil. Sometimes, like fertilizer, life stinks. Especially if you work in Sanitech. That's just a Gary Brown joke, if you didn't get it. But would you guys agree, those are two words we don't like to put together, do we? Life stinks. No, we don't. We don't. Those are two words we don't like to adjoin and see together. Life stinks. But it's true. It's a truth that will eventually lead to growth. But first we have this. And you might look at this and you'll say, okay, we followed the steps, the process, the way, and it's a truth that's going to eventually lead to life. But now, geeks, where's the life? Because I don't want to look at dirt and fertilizer, smelling fertilizer for the rest of my days. I need some green. If you could just throw in a flower there, that would be grand. Where's the love? I want to show you a set of pictures up on the screen. And they're going to come on one by one. And I want you to tell me which ones represent life to you and which ones represent death to you. Would you be willing to do that? Okay? Very simple. Life or death. Two options. So let's put the first one up. Life or death? Life. Okay. Second picture. Life or death? Death. Okay. Next picture. Yes, you guys are good, eh? Death. Okay. Next picture. Is that a pretty one? Last picture. Why not death? You said death for the others, why did it change? What if I told you all those pictures represented life? What if I told you all those pictures represent life? Because whether you might see it or not, in a few months' time, green will start to appear again. In a few months' time, new crop on the farmland is going to start to take height. In a few days, flowers will even bloom. Just as Jesus would break out of the tomb. Do you believe that?
Yes.
Friends, Jesus always knew the path he was walking as a man, and that the Father was preparing him to save the whole world. And it all started with his birth, which we're going to celebrate on Wednesday. So invite your families and friends to come and be a part of it, because it's going to be a great time, which would eventually lead from his birth into his early 30s when he began his ministry. But he always knew where it would lead him. But he never stops. He never stops because he knew it was the right way. Because he knew it was a truth that was going to lead to what? To life. And you know what else Jesus knew? Let's see if I can do this. He knew gloves weren't going to cut it. Just need to take them off. He knew gloves weren't going to cut it. In other words, he didn't even use gloves. He didn't try and make things easier. In other words, he allowed his hands to become dirty. You're saying Jesus sinned? No, not at all. But he took on the sin. And his hands get dirty so he can work the soil. So he can turn the dirt of every single life into something far richer. What the enemy thought he could cover you up with, the enemy Jesus starts to be like, oh, I don't think so, Satan. And he starts to work the soil some more. He works the soil. And his hands become pretty dirty. It's hands that would eventually become pierced with holes. But they became holes that we could place our seeds of faith in. They became hands and a life that we are able to reflect so that we can impart power into each other today. We can see healings and miracles taking place because of what he did. The dirt he took upon himself for us. Because if you think about the thorns that he wore, because he didn't just take the thorns, because if many of us, if we try and take thorns, it would hurt us. But Jesus wasn't worried about the hurt, so he takes it, but he doesn't just take the thorns, he wears the thorns as a crown, as the king. Because the enemy couldn't bury what God had planted, what God had destined, what God had promised, and that was going to be everlasting life through his son Jesus. The enemy couldn't stop him. and he conquered the grave. Isn't it worthy of celebrating even on Wednesday? Even this morning, as we are gathered here today. Why don't you celebrate? Why don't you say, Jesus, thank you. Thanks, Lord. Thank you, Slade. Do you guys know that God has been preparing us as a church? Our ministry times where we pray for one another, and then from the moment we even arrive at church and we meet with people, we laugh with one another, and the coffee times as we share eats and biscuits, God has been preparing us for something. You might say, well, what is it? What is He preparing us for? Has it come? Is it still to come? Well, I'm not entirely sure. But one thing I do know is that it's coming. You might say, what has God been preparing us for, Keegan, as a church? I'm not entirely sure, but it's coming. It's coming. You might say, is there anything else we need to do before it comes? Like, when exactly? I'm not too sure, but how about we keep reading some scripture and see what happens? Hey, would you like that? So we're going to continue reading in the next chapter from John chapter 20, verse 1 to 16. And this is how it goes. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the stripes of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the stripes of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw the angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." "Oh, Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. She thought he was the gardener. She wasn't entirely wrong, was she? She just didn't realize at first which gardener she was talking to. The gardener of her faith. The gardener of all creation who had just broken out of the tomb and conquered the grave. But what was the difference between Mary and the other disciples? Because they had two different experiences. Mary saw the angels in the tomb and she even got to see Jesus, whereas the other disciples didn't. What was the difference? Did she have more faith? Did she believe more than them? Did she love and care for Jesus a lot more than the disciples did? But that can't be the case because, John liked referring to himself as the one whom Jesus loved. So I don't know, so what was it? What was the difference between them? If you have a look at verse 10, It says the disciples went back to where they were staying. In other words, they looked inside the tomb, they couldn't see Jesus' body, so they just went back to where they were staying. Have you ever felt like nothing is changing? Have you ever felt like nothing is ever getting better, like all hope is lost, and as a result you went back? You went back to your old way of living. You went back maybe into stress, back into worry, back into depression, back into addictions. Like that's all you have. But friends, I want to tell you, just because you cannot see it, just because you cannot see Him, doesn't mean He isn't there.
Thank you, Lord.
It doesn't mean He isn't moving. He is still growing within each and every single one of you. The breakthrough is coming. In this church, the breakthrough is coming. Like Mary, we just need to wait a little longer. Like Mary, we just need to stick around a bit more and see what happens. Because God has got some incredible things coming our way. Because He is the way, and He is the truth, and He is the life. Even in Mary's crime, she was still waiting. The very reason she was at the tomb that early, to the point it was still dark, was because she was still believing. And even in the dark, even in the crying and in her sorrow and sadness, she hears someone approach her from behind. And it's the King. It's the gardener of her faith. And it's in this moment, if I have to picture it, where the sun starts to rise, and colors of orange, yellow, pink start to stroke their cheeks. And I see Jesus start to sing a scripture over Mary like we read not so long ago in Isaiah 61. It's just the scripture that comes to my mind for some reason. I just see Jesus looking at Mary and telling her in her heart, Mary, I now bestow on you a crown of beauty instead of ashes. I pour over you oil of joy instead of mourning. I wrap around you a garment of praise instead of the spirit of despair. I'm turning you into an oak tree of righteousness to display my splendor and glory. And you know what? He bestows that on you too. He bestows that on you too. Because He is your way, He is your truth, and He is your life. The only thing I can see with Mary in that moment is that she waited. She waited to see what was going to happen. She knew good things take time. Good things take time. Sometimes miracles take time. Sometimes healings take time. Sometimes provision takes time. But friends, the breakthrough is coming. It's coming. The enemy cannot bury what God has planted, what God has started in you. Isn't that exciting? Isn't that exciting for us as a church? So we're going to pray.